at the White House, where you're now literally counting down. We're just about 40 minutes odd to go for the Indian Prime Minister to come here. The grounds of the White House are now quite full. I see there's a nice little putting range here. I'm not sure if President Biden is much of a golfer and whether he gets a chance to be out there. But there's some nice ideas, there's some nice color visible over here, and hopefully some of this, all the people from the Prime Minister's team and the other who are here, some of the ideas which can be taken back will be taken back. They also have very nice waiting area, like there are these nice tents where the media can stand and do their lives. I mean, we of course don't have them, which is why I'm out in the rain. But the American media has these very nice long tents, shamianas, small shamianas. They've got heaters inside over there. They're standing there. They have a backdrop which looks into the White House, but they're all covered. So I think there's some good ideas. If anybody is watching, especially if you're in government, and given the number of messages I'm getting, so clearly a lot of people seem to be watching, please do take these observations very, very seriously. It would be nice to have some of that stuff at Vijay Chowk and elsewhere, where everyone, you know, is more comfortable than our reporters are when they're out in the sun, the cold, the winds, the rains at Vijay Chowk. But anyway, no harm suggesting it. Let's see if anything comes off it or not. But clearly, safety, comfort, very, very critical here, so that everybody's not out in the cold and out in the winter. So anyway, let me just turn around. They're all and show you the practice that's going on. It's like a dry run, taking everyone through the routines for this morning's program. And in a while from now, the American president will be here. Let's just listen in. Okay, I want to go across now to Elbridge Colby. Elbridge Colby is the co-founder of the Marathon Initiative, a policy initiative focused on developing strategies in the United States for sustained great power competition. He's the author of the Strategy of Denial, American Defense in the Age of Great Power Conflict, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy and Force Development. Elbridge Colby, welcome to India Today's live coverage. I'm broadcasting this morning from the South Lawns of the White House. How much of what we're seeing at this moment between India and the United States is as a reflex to China emerging as the primary threat for both our countries, like the GE 414 technology transfer? Would some of that happen if China hadn't been as big a danger for both countries right now, Mr. Colby?
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you and your audience. Pleasure. Look, I think the answer is honestly yes. Obviously, the two governments are not going to stress this point, but I think one of the things that I actually really appreciate about the foreign policy perspective of the Modi government is its candor and realism, and sort of being unafraid about talking about strategic and geopolitical rivalries. So I'll pay the compliment back, and I wish that we pursued that a little bit more here in Washington. But I think absolutely. Look, the United States and India obviously have people-to-people ties, trade, etc. But that's true with many countries, and it has been true for some time. What I think is really driving the relationship is a deep alignment of interest, and actually that is the most stable grounding for a serious long-term relationship, because although it's possible China will collapse, I think it's very, very unlikely. And, you know, I have a very different view from what President Biden said the other day in California. I think China is serious as a heart attack. I think it has an enormous and growing economy. It's competing at the forefront of technology. It's pushing countries around, obviously Philippines and others in the South China Sea, Taiwan, and of course India, where there's been direct clashes along the line of actual control, etc. So I think this is what's really motivating both sides to push. I think the relationship goes back 20 years, you know, the sort of new relationship goes back about 20 years, but for a long time it was very desultory and kind of plodding. And I think things stepped up in the last couple of years, and to credit this administration, I think this visit and the announcements of it are a major step forward. But I think that's, you know, basically based on an alignment of shared interests.
The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visited Beijing. It seemed as an effort to try and de-escalate mounting tensions and find a way of de-risking, if not disengaging. and soon after President Biden was quoted as calling Xi Jinping a dictator. Where do you see the trajectory of relations between Beijing and DC go from this moment, on the back of Anthony Blinken's comments and on the back of what the President just said?
Well, I think the thaw, frankly, was mostly a projection from the American side, largely optical and unrealistic. And the Chinese never gave really any impression that there was a thaw. I think the President's comments have, sort of put the sort of formalized what was already going to be inevitable, which was that the rivalry is deep and structural. The United States and China are not going to go to a G2. They're not going to be able to compete while cooperating. This administration line, some elements of the administration, they want to cooperate on climate and non-proliferation because, as Xi Jinping says, it basically implies the relationship is essentially zero-sum. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't ways of making it less dangerous. That's important, and I do think it's important to talk, and of course India, Japan, other countries do talk to the Chinese, but we shouldn't be deluded about what's actually going to happen. We are in a very, very dangerous time, and just having a nice meeting, a photo op, by the way, which was, I would say, kind of a supplicant set of photos of Secretary Blinken. It was not a good image. That's not going to change anything fundamental.
There are also the likes of several experts like Ashley Tellers who've come out and struck a discordant note, basically suggesting caution to President Biden, saying that don't expect India to be on your side if China were to attack Taiwan, for example. What are you making of these discordant voices of people who've tracked the India-America relationship but seem to be advocating a point of view quite different from the position the current Biden administration has taken, Mr. Kalbi?
I'm always hesitant to have a different view, especially on India, than Ashley Tellis, because he's really a brilliant person, not only on the India relationship, but more broadly. But I fundamentally disagree with his article in Foreign Affairs. I mean, my impression of the Indian government and its behavior is that it has a very strong stand on China. It's not deliberately provocative or sort of gratuitous, frankly, in the way that President Biden's comments were the other night. It's careful, but it's also firm and strong. I think what I will say is, and I wrote a piece in the Hindustan Times after being in Delhi earlier this year, I do think the Indian government and system should appreciate more the danger of a conflict over Taiwan, because such a conflict, God forbid, if it happened, would be much larger than just a narrow conflict over Taiwan. And if the United States is not prepared, and our allies are not prepared, it could lead to the defeat of the United States in the Western Pacific. And if this happened, China would be essentially uninhibited in its ability to project power into the South Asia and the Indian Ocean area. So the famous comment, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin, one of our founding fathers, said, we can hang separately or we can stand together. And I think it's not that India would contribute militarily to a defense of Taiwan, but I think India should see its interests as directly implicated in a Taiwan conflict, and that it's quite possible in this decade. I mean, the Chinese are building and practicing a military specifically to do that, and I was at the Shangri-La dialogue a few weeks ago in Singapore, and of course they openly say they reserve the right to use force to resolve the issue in their favor.
Alright, they're now playing some Hindi music at the South Lawn of the White House, and the crowds behind me going completely nuts and bonkers. Thank you very much, Mr. Kalbi, for joining us.